You found your way to Whispers of Crimes, a quiet corner where the shadows of the past are gently told. Here, we speak of real crimes and mysteries, not to shock or scare, but to wonder, to reflect, and maybe to help you fall asleep. So close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and come with me into tonight's case. Soft ambient tension builds underneath narrator's voice. In the early morning hours of January 27th, 2015, inside a luxury estate in South Africa as wine country, an entire family was butchered with an axe. No forced entry. No signs of struggle except the ones that ended in death. And the only survivor? Calm, almost too calm. Martin, Teresa, and their son Rudy slaughtered in their sleep. 16-year-old Marley barely clinging to life. And standing among the carnage was 20-year-old Henri Van Breda, bloody, injured, and with a story that didn't quite add up. He said a masked intruder did it. But the forensic evidence told a much darker tale. Who could take an axe to their own family? Why would a privileged young man from a respected household destroy everything in one night? This is the chilling story of the Van Breda axe murders, a case that stunned South Africa and left behind one unanswerable question: what really happened inside that house? Chapter 1: The Van Breda family and their return to South Africa. The Van Breda family story began in South Africa but expanded across continents. Martin and Teresa Van Breda were successful, upwardly mobile professionals. Martin, in particular, had built his wealth through a successful career in business, specifically tied to his role at the Australian branch of the international property group, Emil and Volkers. The family lived for years in Perth, Western Australia, where their children Rudy, Henri, and Marley were educated in elite institutions. Rudy, the eldest, was exceptionally bright and driven. He pursued an engineering degree at the University of Melbourne in Australia, embodying the ambition and discipline that seemed to define the Van Breda identity. Henri, on the other hand, struggled. He enrolled at the same university but was unable to maintain academic performance. Rumors circulated about drug use, frequent absences, and signs of a downward spiral. Henri ultimately dropped out and returned to South Africa, moving back in with his parents at their luxurious home in the de Zal's Winelands Golf Estate in Stellenbosch. The de Zal's estate was the kind of place that promised absolute security and tranquility. With 24-hour gated security, surveillance cameras, and a reputation for being a haven for the wealthy, it was the last place anyone expected to become the site of one of South Africa's most brutal crimes. The family of 5 reunited there, appearing at least publicly as tightly knit and stable. But behind the walls of privilege, personal dynamics were deteriorating. Martin reportedly had concerns about Henri's behavior. There were arguments, particularly over Henri's lifestyle choices and apparent lack of direction. These tensions were, for the most part, invisible to outsiders, but they would later be central to understanding what happened in the early hours of January 27th, 2015. Chapter 2: A night of unimaginable horror in the early hours of January 27th, 2015. The tranquility of de Zal's was shattered. At 7:12 a.m., emergency services received a call from Henri Van Breda. The voice on the line was eerily calm. Henri reported that his family had been attacked by an unknown intruder. According to his statement, a balaclava-clad assailant wielding an axe had entered their home and launched a violent assault on the family. Henri said he had been knocked unconscious and woke to find his parents and brother dead, with his sister Marley gravely injured. Responding paramedics and police officers were met with a scene of almost incomprehensible brutality. Martin and Teresa were found in their bedroom, bloodied and motionless. Rudy lay dead in the hallway, showing signs of a prolonged and desperate struggle. Marley, astonishingly, was still alive, but barely. Her head had been bludgeoned with such force that her skull had been fractured and her jugular vein severed. She was rushed to hospital in critical condition. Henri was found walking about with what appeared to be minor, superficial injuries to his torso and arms. He claimed these were inflicted during his confrontation with the intruder. Strangely, he was calm, cooperative, and coherent in affect that many found odd, given the carnage around him. From the outset, detectives were suspicious. There were no signs of forced entry. The axe used in the attacks was found on the premises. Nothing had been stolen, and there was no evidence of any external party entering or exiting the property. The story of the unknown intruder began to crumble almost immediately under forensic scrutiny. Chapter 3. Forensic science undermines Henri's story. The investigation quickly shifted its focus. Forensic investigators noted that the physical evidence contradicted Henri's account. The crime scene showed signs of an extended, focused attack, not the rushed, chaotic encounter one might expect from a home invasion. Blood spatter analysis played a crucial role in dismantling Henri's version of events. Henri claimed that he had been unconscious for part of the attack. However, forensic analysis indicated that he would have had to be present and active during the killings. His proximity to the victims, combined with DNA and blood pattern evidence, pointed to his direct involvement. Blood matching his brother Rudy's DNA was found on Henri's shorts, and traces of both Rudy's and Martin's blood were detected on his socks. The axe used in the murders belonged to the Van Breda household. It had been wiped clean, but not completely. There was sufficient residue to link it to the victims. Police discovered no footprints or fingerprints pointing to an external assailant. The family's alarm system had not been triggered, and surveillance from the estate's perimeter showed no sign of intrusion or escape. More troubling was Henri's behavior after the murders. Data from his phone showed that he waited nearly 3 hours before calling emergency services. During that time, he had visited websites, browsed the internet, and possibly attempted to fabricate his story. The injuries on his body were deemed self-inflicted shallow cuts, made in such a way as to appear dramatic, but ultimately superficial. The evidence didn't point to an intruder. It pointed directly at Henri. Chapter 4. Arrest, Public Shock, and Legal Strategy after months of investigation. On June 13, 2016, nearly 18 months after the murders, Henri Van Breda was arrested and charged with 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of defeating the ends of justice. He was released on bail under strict conditions, including house arrest, travel restrictions, and mandatory drug testing. The arrest sparked widespread media attention in South Africa and internationally. Public reaction ranged from disbelief to outrage. Henri, clean-cut and from a respected, affluent family, didn't fit the conventional image of a murderer. The sheer brutality of the killings, carried out with an axe against his own family, intensified the public fascination. Henri pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense leaned heavily on the intruder theory and emphasized the lack of a clear motive. They argued that the case was built on circumstantial evidence and that no one had actually witnessed Henri committing the crimes. They also questioned the credibility of the forensic evidence, claiming contamination and investigative bias. But as pretrial hearings and depositions progressed, the defense's narrative began to lose credibility. Meanwhile, the prosecution focused on behavioral evidence, Henri's internet history, his odd demeanor post-crime, and most importantly, the forensic data that placed him at the center of the attacks. Chapter 5. The high-profile trial. The trial began on April 3, 2017, at the Western Cape High Court. It was not a jury trial. South Africa's legal system assigned such matters to a judge, in this case, Judge Siraj Desai. The proceedings were open to the media. turning the trial into a national spectacle. Over several months, more than 70 witnesses were called to testify. These included forensic experts, security consultants, digital analysts, medical professionals, and individuals who knew Henri and his family. The prosecution's case was methodical and evidence-based. They painted a picture of a deteriorating young man under family pressure, likely struggling with drug dependency and increasingly alienated from his successful siblings and parents. They proposed that Henri had attacked his parents in their bedroom first, moved to confront Rudy in the hallway, who fought back valiantly, and then turned on Marley when she entered the scene. They argued that after the murders, Henri had tried to clean the acts, change clothes, and stage a crime scene that suggested an intruder had been responsible. The defense struggled to counter the weight of forensic data. They insisted that Henri had been unconscious for part of the attack and maintained that the family had been targeted by an unknown, now vanished assailant. But without any credible evidence of this person's existence, the argument fell flat. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of the trial was the absence of Marley's testimony. Due to her severe injuries and memory loss, she was unable to recall the events of that night and therefore could not corroborate or refute either side's claims. Chapter 6. Guilty on all counts. On May 21st, 2018, Judge Desai delivered his verdict. Henri Van Breda was guilty on all charges. The judgment spanned several hours and laid out, in painstaking detail, why the court rejected the intruder theory and found the forensic evidence overwhelming. Judge Desai called the murders cold-blooded and calculated, describing the attacks as driven by an unknown personal motive. He stated that Henri had shown no remorse and that his version of events was not only improbable, not worthy of belief. The ruling emphasized the brutality of the crime. Martin and Rudy had suffered multiple blows to the head and neck, with Rudy's injuries indicating a prolonged struggle. Teresa was killed with a single devastating blow. Marley was left to die, though miraculously she survived. The sentence followed on June 7, 2018. Henri was given 3 life sentences for the murders, 15 years for attempted murder, and 1 year for obstruction of justice. He was remanded to Pollsmoor Prison, a high-security facility notorious for overcrowding and violence. Henri's appeals were later dismissed, cementing the end of the judicial road. Chapter 7. Aftermath, Marley's silence, and lingering shadows. The aftermath of the Van Breda murders continues to ripple through South African society. Marley Van Breda, who was 16 at the time of the attack, survived against all odds. After multiple surgeries and a long rehabilitation, she regained physical stability but continues to live privately, shielded by court protections and family guardianship. She has never spoken publicly about her brother or the events of that night. The Dizals' home was eventually sold, its market value forever tainted by the infamy of what had occurred within its walls. The Van Breda name, once associated with success and privilege, is now inextricably linked to tragedy and betrayal. The question of why still looms. No clear motive ever emerged during the trial. Theories include jealousy, rage, drug psychosis, or mental illness, but none have been definitively proven. That silence, especially from Henri, has deepened the mystery. For many, the Van Breda case was a wake-up call about the fragility of appearances. It revealed how, even in the most protected, luxurious spaces, human darkness can flourish. And it left behind one enduring figure, Marley, whose survival stands as both a tragedy and a quiet triumph. That's all for tonight's story. Another thread in the web of true crime, quietly unraveling as the night goes on. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. And if sleep has already taken you, may your dreams be peaceful and your mind at ease. I'll be here next time by the fire with another story waiting to be told. Good night, and don't forget to lock your doors.